The first time I noticed Wyatt at the laundromat, he was sitting in the exact same cracked blue chair I always used. I remember standing there with my laundry basket, digging into my hip, staring at him like an idiot while the dryers rattled behind us. It was Sunday night, raining outside, and the whole place smelled like detergent and wet concrete. And this guy, this tall, tattooed, intimidating-looking guy, was casually taking my seat. Not that it was actually my seat, but after 8 months of living in that apartment building with the broken washing machines, I'd unofficially claimed it. Far corner, next to the vending machine, close enough to the dryers to hear when they stopped. I was tired, soaked from the rain, and honestly ready to have a bad attitude about it. Then Wyatt looked up. "Shit," he said immediately, standing halfway. "You always sit here, right?" His voice surprised me. Deep, yeah, but softer than I expected. I blinked. What?" He pointed at the chair. "I've seen you every Sunday for like 2 months. You always sit here with that book." I looked down at the paperback in my hand, then back at him. "You noticed that?" His mouth twitched like he was trying not to smile. Hard not to. That should have been the end of it. Small, awkward interaction. Nothing important. Instead, he grabbed his basket off the chair and slid it aside. "Seat's yours." I laughed a little. "You don't have to move." "Nah," he shrugged. "Feels wrong now." That was the first real conversation Wyatt and I ever had. And honestly, I couldn't stop thinking about him after that. Because Wyatt looked like the kind of guy you cross the street to avoid at night. Tall, broad shoulders, black tattoos crawling up both arms and disappearing under his sleeves, thick silver rings on his fingers, buzzed dark hair, a scar through one eyebrow. But then he'd open his mouth and ask things like, "What are you reading?" Or, "You want the less broken dryer? Number 6 works better." Or, "You looked cold walking in. You okay?" It completely threw me off. That first night, we ended up talking for almost an hour while our clothes dried. Well, mostly he talked. I learned he worked at a motorcycle repair shop 3 blocks away. Learned he came to the laundromat every Sunday after closing up the garage. Learned he drank those awful canned vanilla coffees because real coffee tastes like burnt dirt. I also learned he smiled with his whole face, which was dangerous. Because once I noticed that smile, I started looking for it every week. My name's Philip, by the way. 26, graphic designer, chronically bad at talking to attractive men, especially men like Wyatt. He wasn't just hot. He had that calm confidence that made you hyper-aware around him. Like he knew exactly how much space he took up in the room without ever trying to dominate it. Meanwhile, I could barely maintain eye contact for longer than 5 seconds. But Damon became this weird thing for us. Every Sunday around 7:30, I'd walk into the laundromat carrying my stupid IKEA laundry bag, and Wyatt would already be there, always. Sometimes sitting in my chair, but after that first week, he'd immediately stand up when he saw me. "Saved your spot." The second Sunday, I laughed. By the 4th Sunday, I expected it. By the 6th, I started looking forward to it way too much. It became routine. He'd save me the chair. I'd bring snacks from the bakery down the street. We'd complain about our week while old dryers shook the floor around us. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Wyatt stopped feeling intimidating. He started feeling safe, which scared me even more, because I had a habit of reading too much into things. A guy remembers your seat at the laundromat. That doesn't mean anything. A guy starts buying your favorite vending machine chips before you arrive. Still maybe nothing. A guy notices when you cut your hair or switch cologne or seem stressed before you even speak. Okay, maybe that starts meaning something. But I still told myself not to be stupid. Wyatt had never actually flirted with me. Not directly. There were moments, though. Little moments that stuck in my head at night. Like the time I came in frustrated after getting yelled at by a client all day. I barely said 2 words before Wyatt looked over from folding his shirts. "You want to talk about it?" And I don't know why that hit me so hard. Maybe because nobody usually noticed things like that about me. Or the week I showed up late because I gotten caught in a storm. My hoodie was soaked through, hair dripping water onto the tile. Wyatt looked up from his chair and immediately frowned. "Seriously, Philip." Before I could answer, he stood up, peeled off his own dark gray hoodie, and handed it to me. "What?" "No." "Put it on. You'll freeze." "I'm covered in tattoos. I'm basically insulated." I laughed so hard I snorted, and Wyatt looked absurdly pleased with himself afterward. That hoodie smelled like cedar wood and laundry detergent. I thought about it for days, maybe weeks. The thing was, I couldn't figure Wyatt out. Some Damon, he'd sit close enough that our knees bumped while we talked. Other Damon, he'd seem quieter, almost nervous. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking. And every single time our eyes met, he'd immediately glance away, like he was the shy one, which made absolutely no sense considering he looked like he fought bears recreationally. Then one night, something happened that completely shifted things between us. It was late October, cold enough that everyone walking into the laundromat had red noses and damp jackets. I got there around 7:30 like usual, but Wyatt wasn't inside. At first, I figured he was running late. I loaded my washer, sat in the chair, checked my phone way too many times. Read, no Wyatt. And for some reason, that disappointed me more than it should have. I was halfway through a chapter of my book when the laundromat door finally opened, but Wyatt didn't walk in alone. He came in carrying a little girl asleep against his shoulder, maybe 6 years old, curly dark hair, tiny pink rain boots dangling against his leg, and Wyatt looked exhausted. The second he spotted me, his entire face softened. "There's my seat owner," he said quietly. I tried very normal not to stare at the child currently cuddled into his neck. "You have a kid?" He blinked once like he forgot she existed for a second. "Oh no, my niece." I don't know why that relieved me instantly. "She okay?" "Yeah." He adjusted her carefully in his arms. "My sister got called into work last minute and daycare closed early." The little girl stirred sleepily against him. Then she lifted her head, saw me sitting there, and squinted. "Who's that?" Wyatt looked at me for a second before answering, and something about the tiny paws made my stomach flip. "That's Philip," he said softly. The little girl stared at me another few seconds. Then she smiled. "Oh, the laundromat guy." And Wyatt immediately looked horrified. I burst out laughing. "You talk about me?" His ears actually turned red, which somehow was the hottest thing I'd ever seen in my life. "Shut up," he muttered. And that was the moment I realized this thing between us, it definitely wasn't one-sided. After the whole laundromat guy thing, Wyatt couldn't look me in the eye for almost 10 minutes, which was honestly incredible to witness. This massive tattooed man who looked like he belonged leaning against a motorcycle in some cologne ad was suddenly fumbling with dryer sheets because his niece accidentally exposed him. Meanwhile, I was trying not to smile too hard. The little girl, apparently named Ava, had fully woken up by then and decided that she liked me immediately. Mostly because I gave her the chocolate chip muffin I'd bought for myself. "She's going to expect snacks every week now," Wyatt warned. Ava nodded seriously from her chair. "Yes." I laughed. "Fair enough." Wyatt shook his head like he was exhausted already, but there was this softness in his expression when he looked at her. A completely different version of him than the one I'd first met. It did dangerous things to me. Watching Wyatt carefully untangle Ava's curls while waiting for the dryers. Watching him carry her on one arm while loading detergent with the other. Watching him instinctively pull her closer whenever strangers walked in. Yeah, I was done for. At one point, Ava climbed into Wyatt's lap while he folded tiny little sweaters, and she looked between us with suspiciously narrowed eyes. "Are you Daddy's friend?" The entire laundromat went silent in my brain. Wyatt nearly dropped a sock. "I am not your dad," he said immediately. "You act like one." "That's because your actual mom lets you eat crayons," Ava gasped. "That was one time." I was laughing so hard I had to lean forward in my chair. Wyatt pointed accusingly at me. "Don't encourage her. You're doing great on your own." He rolled his eyes, but he was smiling again. That smile stayed in my head all week. After that night, things between us shifted. Not dramatically, just closer. Like something unspoken had finally surfaced between us. Wyatt started texting me outside Damon. It began innocently enough. He somehow found my Instagram after I mentioned a design project I was working on. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I got a message. "Wyatt, this logo client of yours is blind if they rejected that first version." I stared at my phone for a full minute before smiling like an idiot. After that, the text became regular. Random photos from his garage, pictures of dogs he met during the day, complaints about customers, questions about movies. And every single morning after that, he sent me the same message. "Morning, seat owner." It became my favorite part of the day embarrassingly fast. I tried not to overthink it. But then Wyatt started doing things that were very difficult not to overthink. Like remembering tiny details about me. One Sunday, I mentioned offhand that the heating in my apartment was terrible. The next week, he walked into the laundromat carrying a folded electric blanket. "You said your place gets cold." I stared at him. "Wyatt, what? You can't just buy people heated blankets." "Why not?" "Because that's boyfriend behavior." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Instant silence. Wyatt froze halfway through loading his washer. I froze too. Neither of us moved. Then slowly, very slowly, Wyatt looked at me and said quietly, "Maybe I don't mind that." My stomach absolutely flipped over itself. I opened my mouth, closed it again, because suddenly I couldn't breathe correctly. Wyatt looked nervous immediately after saying it, like he regretted it. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Sorry, that sounded—" "No," I interrupted too quickly. "No, it didn't." Another silence. Heavy this time. Different. And for the first time since meeting him, I realized Wyatt wasn't just casually nice. He was trying. With me. The realization made my chest feel too tight, because the truth was, I'd liked him for a while now. Long enough that Damon had stopped being ordinary. Long enough that I caught myself thinking about him while grocery shopping, or walking home, or lying in bed at night. Long enough that seeing his name light up my phone made me stupidly happy. And now suddenly, it felt possible that maybe he felt the same. That thought terrified me, because wanting Wyatt felt dangerous in the way all meaningful things do. Like if I let myself hope too much, I'd ruin everything. So instead of saying anything smart, I grabbed the electric blanket and muttered, "Thank you." Wyatt smiled softly. "Yeah." And somehow that tiny moment changed everything. 2 weeks later, Wyatt asked me to dinner. Well, sort of. We were sitting in the laundromat after closing time because the owner knew Wyatt and let us stay while finishing our dryers. I was half asleep in my chair, scrolling through my phone, when Wyatt suddenly said, "You busy Friday?" I looked up. "Depends on how good the offer is." His mouth twitched. "There's a burger place near my shop." "Okay. They have garlic fries." Reed listening. And I was thinking, maybe you could stop pretending this isn't basically a date. My brain completely short-circuited. Wyatt looked calm saying it, but his fingers were gripping a towel way too tightly, which meant he was nervous too. That helped slightly. "You think this is basically a date?" I asked carefully. Wyatt held my gaze. "I think I save you a seat every week because I like seeing you." My heart started pounding so hard it actually annoyed me. "And," he continued quietly, "I think you keep showing up because maybe you like seeing me too." God, there was no smooth response to that. Especially because he was right. Completely right. So instead, I smiled helplessly and asked, "What time Friday?" The look on Wyatt's face after that, I don't think I'll ever forget it. Like relief mixed with excitement mixed with disbelief. Like he genuinely wasn't sure I'd say yes. "7?" he asked. "7's good." And just like that, I had a date with the tattooed laundromat guy. The problem was that once we acknowledged whatever this thing was, the tension got worse. So much worse. Because suddenly every little touch meant something. Every glance lingered longer. Every smile felt loaded. Friday finally came, and I changed outfits 4 times before leaving my apartment. I hated myself for caring that much. But Wyatt made me nervous in a very specific way. Not because he was intimidating anymore, because he mattered. And that was somehow scarier. When I got to the burger place, Wyatt was already outside waiting. Black jacket, dark jeans, arms crossed against the cold. And the second he saw me, his entire face lit up. That stupid, beautiful smile again. "You came," he said. I laughed nervously. "You invited me." "Yeah." Reed feels surprising. I tried very hard not to melt on the sidewalk. Then Wyatt stepped closer. Not all the way, just enough that I caught the familiar cedarwood smell from his hoodie again. "You look really good, Philip." And that absolutely ruined me. Because Wyatt said it so honestly. Like he wasn't trying to flirt. Like he just needed me to know. I felt heat crawl up my neck instantly. "Thanks," I muttered. Wyatt smiled slightly. "Cute when you blush." Oh my God. His laugh rumbled low in his chest, warm and easy. And before I knew it, he reached for the restaurant door, holding it open for me. "Come on, seat owner." I walked inside, smiling so hard my face hurt. And for the first time in a long time, something felt like it might actually become real. Dinner with Wyatt was supposed to be casual. That's what I told myself anyway. Just burgers, just hanging out outside the laundromat for once. Totally normal. Except nothing about it felt normal. Not the way Wyatt kept looking at me across the table like he was trying to memorize my face. Not the way his knee brushed mine under the booth and stayed there. And definitely not the way my chest tightened every time he smiled. The burger place was crowded and loud, but somehow it still felt weirdly intimate sitting there with him. Wyatt had rolled his sleeves up halfway through dinner, exposing more tattoos along his forearms. Black ink twisted around muscles that flexed every time he picked up his drink. I tried not to stare. I failed repeatedly. "You're doing it again," Wyatt said casually. I blinked. "Doing what?" "Looking at my tattoos like they personally offended you." I almost choked on a fry. "They're just distracting." One of his eyebrows lifted. Distracting good or distracting bad? I grabbed my water immediately to buy time. Wyatt laughed softly under his breath. "You get flustered really easy, Philip. You make it impossible not to." The words slipped out before I could filter them. Wyatt went very still. Then slowly he leaned back in the booth, eyes locked on mine. "Carter," he said quietly. That one word sat heavy in my stomach. God, how was this man real? After dinner, neither of us seemed ready to go home, which became obvious when we spent 20 minutes standing outside the restaurant pretending we were still deciding where to go next. Cold air curled around us while traffic passed nearby. Wyatt shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. "You want to walk a little?" I nodded immediately. So we did. No destination. Just wandering through quiet streets while talking about stupid things. Favorite movies, worst jobs, childhood stories. At some point, Wyatt admitted he used to be obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid. I laughed so hard I had to stop walking. You? I managed between breaths. You look like a dinosaur kid? I was a dinosaur kid. You absolutely collected plastic raptors. His expression turned defensive. They were velociraptors. Oh my god, that's worse. Wyatt grinned. You're making fun of me now, huh? Yes. Rude. Adorable, though. The second I said it, silence dropped between us. Not awkward, just charged. Wyatt stared at me under the glow of a street lamp, and suddenly I became hyper-aware of how close we were standing. His face softened. You think I'm adorable? I swallowed hard. Sometimes. Wyatt stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that my pulse immediately sped up. Philip. The way he said my name, low and careful, like it mattered. I looked up at him, and for one terrifying second, I thought he was going to kiss me right there on the sidewalk. I wanted him to, badly. But then a car horn sounded somewhere nearby, breaking the moment. Wyatt exhaled sharply and looked away first. Sorry, he muttered. For what? His jaw flexed slightly. I'm trying not to rush this. That hit me harder than the almost kiss, because suddenly I realized Wyatt wasn't casually flirting. He was being careful with me. Intentional. Like whatever this was mattered to him too. I don't know what possessed me then, but I reached out and lightly caught the sleeve of his jacket. Wyatt looked back at me immediately. You don't have to apologize, I said quietly. His expression changed at that, softened completely. And then, before I could panic about it, Wyatt gently took my hand. Not dramatic, not forceful, just warm fingers sliding carefully against mine like he was checking whether it was okay. I think my entire brain stopped functioning. He glanced down at our hands once, then back at me. Read okay? I nodded instantly. Yeah. Wyatt smiled. Small, real, and just like that, we kept walking through the cold city streets, holding hands like we'd been doing it forever. After that night, things moved naturally. Slowly, but naturally. Wyatt started picking me up from work sometimes. I started bringing him coffee at the garage. We texted constantly. And Damon at the laundromat became unbearable in the best way, because now there was actual tension between us. Real tension. Like the kind where every accidental touch made both of us go quiet for a second. One Sunday, I was leaning over to grab clothes from the dryer when Wyatt reached past me at the same time. His chest pressed briefly against my back. Just for a second, but I swear the entire room tilted. Neither of us moved immediately. I could feel his breath near my ear. Then Wyatt stepped back too fast, muttering, sorry. Meanwhile, I almost dropped half my laundry on the floor. Pathetic. Completely pathetic. And Wyatt wasn't much better. The more comfortable we got emotionally, the more nervous he became physically. Like he wanted to touch me constantly, but was scared of doing too much. It was weirdly sweet. Also incredibly frustrating because by that point, I thought about kissing him basically every hour of the day. Apparently, Wyatt was struggling too. I found that out one night when he invited me to the garage after closing. I need help, he'd texted dramatically. When I got there, I found Wyatt sitting on a rolling mechanic stool, staring angrily at a broken vending machine in the corner. I blinked at him. This is the emergency? It ate my $5. You're unbelievable. It's theft, Philip. I laughed and walked closer. The garage smelled like motor oil and cold air, tools scattered across workbenches under fluorescent lights. Wyatt watched me the entire time I approached. That look again. Like he couldn't help it. What? I asked finally. He leaned back slightly against the stool. Nothing. You're staring. Can you blame me? My stomach flipped instantly. God, this man. I stepped closer before I could overthink it. Close enough now that Wyatt's knees brushed mine where he sat. His eyes lifted slowly to my face. Neither of us spoke. The air between us suddenly felt too thick, and then Wyatt quietly said, "You're killing me lately." Every nerve in my body lit up. What does that mean? His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth, then back to my eyes. It means, he said carefully, I'm trying very hard to be respectful. Oh, I think my heart actually skipped. Wyatt, you don't have to say anything, he said immediately, almost nervous again. I kissed him. I didn't plan to, didn't think. I just grabbed the front of his jacket and kissed him before I lost my nerve. For one terrifying second, Wyatt froze completely. Then, he made this low sound in his throat, and suddenly, his hands were on my waist, pulling me closer, carefully but firmly, like he'd wanted to do it for weeks, which, apparently, he had. The kiss itself wasn't rushed. That's what I remember most. It felt intentional. Wyatt kissed like he did everything else, Steady, focused, careful. But there was so much restraint underneath it that I could barely breathe. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were visibly shaken. Wyatt stared at me like I'd just done something unfair. "Philip," he said hoarsely. I was still gripping his jacket. "Yeah?" "You cannot kiss me like that in my workplace." I burst out laughing instantly. Wyatt groaned, dropping his forehead briefly against my stomach. "I'm serious. You kissed me back." "Obviously I kissed you back." His arms tightened slightly around my waist. Then, quieter, "I've wanted to do that since, week 3 at the laundromat." I smiled helplessly. "Week 3? You wore glasses that day. That's your reason? You looked cute. I don't know what you want from me." I laughed again, but my chest felt painfully full. Because somehow this terrifying-looking tattooed mechanic had become the sweetest thing in my life, and I was already falling way too hard for him. After we kissed, Wyatt got weird. Not bad weird, just visibly overwhelmed. Which honestly made me feel a little better because I'd spent the entire walk home internally screaming. We kissed in his garage, like actual movie-level romantic tension. And now, suddenly this thing between us was real. Very real. The next morning, I woke up to 3 separate texts from him. Wyatt. "Morning." 2 minutes later. "Sorry if I came on too strong last night." Then another one immediately after. "Actually, no, I'm not sorry at all." I laughed so hard into my pillow, it was embarrassing. By the time I responded, he'd already sent another message. "You awake?" I typed back. "Barely." 3 dots appeared instantly. "Come get breakfast with me." No good morning, no pretending to play it cool, just direct. Very Wyatt. So, an hour later, I found myself sitting across from him in a tiny diner near his garage while he nervously destroyed little paper sugar packets with his fingers. "You know," I said finally, "for someone covered in tattoos, you panic surprisingly easy." Wyatt looked offended. "I do not panic. You sent me 4 texts before 8 a.m. That's called communication. That's called spiraling." He pointed at me with his coffee cup. "You kissed me first. That's true. And now I don't know what the rules are." I smiled despite myself. "What rules?" His ears actually turned pink again. God, I loved when that happened. "I don't know," he muttered. "Like, are we dating now?" The fact that this giant, intimidating man asked that so carefully nearly killed me on the spot. I leaned forward slightly over the table. "Do you want to be?" Wyatt looked at me for exactly half a second before answering. Obviously. My chest tightened so hard it almost hurt, because there wasn't hesitation in his voice. No uncertainty, just honesty. I think that's what kept getting me with Wyatt. He never played games. If he liked me, I knew it. If he wanted to see me, he said it. If he was nervous, it showed all over his face. There was something terrifyingly sincere about him. So I smiled and said quietly, "Then yeah, I think we're dating." Wyatt stared at me another second. Then he relaxed so visibly that I burst out laughing. "You were genuinely stressed about this. You have no idea, Wyatt. I really like you, Philip." That shut me up immediately, because he said it so simply, like truth, and suddenly the diner felt too warm. I looked down at my coffee cup, mostly because I didn't trust my face. "I really like you too." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Wyatt softly said, "Cool." I laughed again. "Cool? I'm trying not to scare you away by saying insane things." "Like what?" His eyes flicked up to mine. "Like the fact I haven't stopped thinking about you for months." Oh, that one got me. Badly. Dating Wyatt felt weirdly natural almost immediately. Like we skipped the awkward early stages somehow because we'd already spent months learning each other at the laundromat. We already had routines, inside jokes, comfort. Now there was just kissing involved too. A lot of kissing, actually. Because once Wyatt finally let himself touch me without overthinking it, he became ridiculously affectionate. Not even in a flashy way, just constant little things. A hand against my lower back guiding me through crowds. His fingers brushing mine whenever we sat together. Pulling me closer absent-mindedly while talking. One night we were watching a movie at my apartment, and Wyatt spent almost the entire film lazily tracing shapes against my palm, while I pretended I could still focus on the screen. I couldn't, not remotely. Especially because every once in a while he'd glance over at me with that soft look again, like he still couldn't fully believe this was happening. Truthfully, neither could I. The first time Wyatt came over to my apartment officially as my boyfriend, he immediately frowned at my kitchen. "Your stove is a fire hazard." "That's dramatic." "Philip, it only sparks sometimes." "Why does it spark?" I was laughing too hard to defend myself properly while Wyatt inspected my appliances like a disappointed husband. Then he opened my fridge and got even more upset. "You have no food. I have yogurt. You have expired yogurt. Details." Wyatt stared at me for a long moment, then grabbed his keys. "Come on, where are we going?" "Grocery shopping before you accidentally die." I followed him out, still laughing. But honestly, that domestic little moment affected me more than it should have, because no one had really taken care of me like that before. Not casually, not consistently. Wyatt just noticed things and fixed them quietly, like it was instinct. At the grocery store, he tossed things into the cart while muttering judgmental commentary under his breath. "Vegetables are important. I know vegetables are important. You bought instant noodles in bulk. They were on sale. You live like a recently divorced college student. Wow, you do." I shoved his shoulder lightly. Wyatt grinned immediately. Then, without thinking, he reached over and kissed my forehead right there in the cereal aisle. I froze. Wyatt froze too, like he hadn't meant to do it publicly. Then slowly, he smiled against my skin, and something in my chest absolutely melted. But the thing about falling for someone good is that eventually it becomes terrifying, because suddenly you have something to lose. And around a month into dating Wyatt, I realized I was getting dangerously attached. Not crush attached, not casual attached, real attached. The kind where his absence changed my mood. The kind where I instinctively reached for my phone to text him every time something happened. The kind where I already couldn't imagine Damon without him. And I think Wyatt felt it too, because he started looking at me differently sometimes, like he'd catch himself getting too soft, too honest. One Sunday night after the laundromat, we were sitting in his truck outside my apartment. Cold windows fogged slightly from the heater running. I was rambling about work stress while Wyatt listened quietly beside me. Then I stopped, mid-sentence. "What?" Wyatt blinked. "What? You're staring again." His mouth twitched slightly. "Sorry." "No, you're not." "No," he admitted softly. "I'm not." The look in his eyes made my pulse stutter. I swallowed hard. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Wyatt hesitated, which almost never happened. Then finally, "Because this feels important." The air left my lungs. Neither of us moved. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windshield. Inside, Wyatt looked at me like I was something fragile and wanted at the same time. And suddenly, I understood something terrifying. I wasn't just falling for him anymore. I already had. Completely. Wyatt must have seen it happen on my face because his expression softened instantly. "Hey," he said quietly. I looked at him. His thumb brushed gently against my hand between us. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Yeah." But my voice betrayed me a little. Wyatt's eyes searched mine carefully. Then, softly, "Come here." And before I could overthink it, he pulled me across the center console and into his lap. I laughed breathlessly. Wyatt. Just for a second. His arms wrapped around me, warm and solid and safe. And the second he held me close, something inside me cracked open a little, because no one had ever held me like that before, like they planned on keeping me. Wyatt pressed one slow kiss against my jaw, then quietly into my neck. "You make me feel calm, Philip." God, that almost ruined me right there. I buried my face against his shoulder, mostly so he wouldn't see how emotional I suddenly felt. But Wyatt noticed anyway. He always noticed. His hand moved slowly up and down my back. "You know what's crazy?" he murmured. "What? You still think I'm the one saving your seat every week?" I pulled back slightly to look at him. Wyatt smiled softly. "But honestly, you saved mine too." And right then, sitting in that parked truck with rain outside and Wyatt holding me like I mattered, I think I realized this wasn't becoming love anymore. It already was. I wish I could say things stayed easy after that. That Wyatt and I just kept falling into each other naturally without complications. But life doesn't really work like that, especially not when you finally find someone who matters enough to scare you. A few days after the truck conversation, Wyatt stopped replying to my texts for almost an entire afternoon, which normally wouldn't have been a huge deal, except Wyatt always replied. Even if he was busy, I'd get something eventually. A thumbs up, a quick working, a photo of some engine part with zero explanation, something. But that Thursday, nothing. By 6 o'clock, I was trying very hard not to spiral. By 7:30, I failed completely. I just convinced myself Wyatt secretly regretted dating me when my phone finally rang. His name flashed across the screen. I answered immediately. "Hey, Philip." The second I heard his voice, my stomach dropped. He sounded exhausted. "What happened?" A long exhale crackled through the speaker. "My sister got into a car accident." Everything inside me tightened. "Oh my God. Is she okay?" "She's okay," he said quickly. "Broken wrist, concussion probably. Ava's okay too." I sank onto my couch instantly. "Seriously, Wyatt?" "I know." His voice sounded rough, a way I'd never heard before, like he was barely holding himself together. "Where are you?" I asked. Hospital. Do you need me there? Silence. Then quieter. Can you come? I was already grabbing my jacket. I found Wyatt sitting alone in a hallway outside the emergency rooms, and honestly, seeing him like that hit me harder than I expected. Usually Wyatt carried himself with this calm steadiness, like nothing could really shake him, but now he looked wrecked. Elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together, hair messy like he'd been running his fingers through it for hours. The second he saw me walking toward him, his entire face changed. Not relieved exactly, just softer, like he could finally breathe a little. I sat beside him immediately. How are they? They're keeping my sister overnight. And Ava? With my mom. He nodded tiredly against the wall behind him. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Wyatt quietly said, I was scared. That got me, because he admitted it so honestly. I reached over without thinking and took his hand. Wyatt gripped mine instantly, hard, like he needed something solid. I'm glad they're okay, I murmured. Me too. Another silence. Then finally Wyatt looked over at me. You came fast. I shrugged slightly. Of course I did. Something emotional flickered across his face so quickly it hurt to look at. He stared at our joined hands a second. Then softly, no one really does that for me. My chest tightened painfully. I squeezed his hand once. Well, I do. Wyatt looked down immediately after that, like he couldn't handle hearing it. And for the first time, I realized something important about him. Wyatt took care of everyone. His sister Ava, people at work, me, but I didn't think many people took care of Wyatt. The realization settled heavily in my chest, because suddenly I understood why he held on to softness so carefully, like he wasn't used to receiving it back. I stayed with him at the hospital until almost 2 o'clock in the morning. At one point, Wyatt fell asleep sitting upright beside me for maybe 20 minutes. I noticed because his head slowly tipped sideways onto my shoulder. And honestly, I think that might have been the exact moment I fully fell in love with him. Not during the kissing, not during the flirting, not even during the hand-holding walks home. It was that. Seeing this strong, careful man finally exhausted enough to let himself lean on someone. On me. When he woke up, he looked embarrassed immediately. Sorry. You literally fell asleep for 20 minutes. I drooled, didn't I? A little. Oh my God. I laughed quietly while Wyatt covered his face with one hand. Then, without thinking, I brushed my fingers lightly through the short hair near the back of his neck. Wyatt froze instantly. Slowly, he looked at me, and the expression on his face after that? Wow. Like no one had touched him gently in a very long time. You okay? I asked softly. He nodded once, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. Then, quietly, you do things to me, Philip. I smiled a little. Carter things? The worst possible things. That made me laugh again, but Wyatt didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed me softly right there in the empty hospital hallway. Careful, slow, like he couldn't help himself. And somehow that tiny kiss felt more intimate than any of the heavier ones we'd shared before. Because it wasn't about tension, it was comfort. When he pulled back, his forehead rested briefly against mine. Thank you for coming, he murmured. I touched his jaw lightly. You never have to thank me for that. Wyatt looked at me for another long second, then finally whispered, There you go again. What? Making it impossible not to love you. My heart genuinely stopped, like physically stopped. Wyatt seemed to realize what he just said at the exact same moment I did. His eyes widened slightly. Neither of us moved. The hallway suddenly felt dead silent, and for the first time since meeting him, Wyatt looked truly nervous. But before he could panic himself into taking it back, I grabbed his face and kissed him again. Harder this time. Immediate, certain, because there was absolutely no world where I was letting him regret saying that. When we finally pulled apart, Wyatt looked completely overwhelmed. Philip, I love you too. That was it. That was all it took. Because the second those words left my mouth, Wyatt kissed me again like he'd been holding himself back for months. His hands slid carefully against my waist, pulling me closer between his knees. And there, under ugly hospital lights at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, Wyatt kissed me like I was home. After that night, everything changed again. Not in some dramatic way, just deeper, softer, more certain. Wyatt started calling me sweetheart when he was tired. I started leaving spare clothes at his apartment. Ava started referring to me exclusively as Uncle Philip, despite several failed attempts at correction. And every Sunday at the laundromat, Wyatt still saved my seat. every single time. No matter how crowded it got, no matter who was sitting there first. One night, I walked in late after work and found Wyatt standing beside the chair arguing with some old man. I'm telling you, someone's sitting there. There's nobody there. There will be. I was laughing before I even reached them. Wyatt turned immediately at the sound, and the second he saw me, that look again, every single time, like I was still his favorite person to see. "There he is," Wyatt said softly. The old man looked between us dramatically. "You're saving seats in a laundromat for dates now?" Wyatt didn't even hesitate. "Yeah." Then he walked over, kissed me quickly in front of everyone, and handed me a vanilla coffee, exactly how I liked it. My chest felt so full it almost hurt, because somehow this ridiculous little laundromat had become the center of my entire life. And Wyatt had become home. The first time I slept over at Wyatt's apartment officially, he got embarrassed about his bedding, which was honestly the least intimidating thing I'd ever witnessed. "I should warn you," he said while unlocking his front door, "my sheets don't match." I stared at him. "That's your concern? They're different shades of gray." "Oh no." Arrest immediately. Wyatt rolled his eyes, but he was smiling. His apartment looked exactly like I imagined it would. Clean, but lived in. Dark furniture, plants somehow still alive despite him claiming he forgot to water them constantly, a stack of motorcycle magazines on the coffee table beside a ridiculously soft blanket. And everywhere I looked, there were little signs of him. Boots by the door, coffee mugs in the sink, a sweatshirt tossed over the couch. It felt strangely intimate, being surrounded by all the quiet pieces of his life. Wyatt noticed me looking around and suddenly looked nervous again. "What? You're overthinking." "I am not. You're doing the eyebrow thing." "The what?" "The worried eyebrow thing." He touched his forehead automatically. "I have a worried eyebrow thing?" "Yes." "That's devastating." I laughed while Wyatt moved around the kitchen pretending not to be flustered. Then he paused halfway through opening the fridge. "You hungry?" "Always." "Carter, I make decent grilled cheese. High standards tonight. You're lucky I like you." I leaned against the counter watching him cook. And honestly, that might have been more intimate than making out. There's something weirdly dangerous about domesticity when you're in love with someone. Watching Wyatt stand at the stove in sweatpants and a black t-shirt while quietly humming to himself should not have affected me as much as it did. But it did. Badly. Especially when he turned around holding 2 plates and caught me staring. "What?" I smiled helplessly. "Nothing." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're doing that look again." "What look?" "The one where you look at me like you're emotionally compromised." I burst out laughing. "You're unbelievable." "And yet," Wyatt said smugly, setting down plates, "you're obsessed with me." Unfortunately, he was correct. Later that night, we ended up tangled together on his couch, watching some terrible action movie neither of us cared about. Well, I tried to watch it. Wyatt kept distracting me. Not intentionally, I don't think. But every time he absent-mindedly rubbed circles against my hip, or kissed the side of my head, or tightened his arm around me, my brain completely stopped functioning. At some point, I noticed Wyatt had gone quiet. I looked up from where I was half curled against him. "You okay?" He nodded once, eyes still on the TV. "Yeah." But his fingers had slowed against my waist. I studied him for a second. Then, quietly, "What's going on in your head?" Wyatt exhaled slowly through his nose. "A lot." I waited. Eventually, he glanced down at me. "This feels serious." The vulnerability in his voice immediately got my attention. I sat up a little straighter against him. "That scares you?" "No." He looked genuinely surprised by the question, then softer. "It scares me how little it scares me." That hit directly in the chest because I understood exactly what he meant. Falling for someone should have felt risky, but with Wyatt, it mostly felt inevitable. Like my life had quietly rearranged itself around him before I even noticed. He looked down at his hand resting against my waist. "I'm used to things ending," he admitted quietly. "People leaving, things getting complicated." I frowned slightly. "Who left?" Wyatt hesitated. "Then, finally, my dad." The room felt quieter instantly. "He bailed when I was 13, Wyatt said, voice even but distant. "Mom worked constantly after that. I kind of just learned to handle things myself." Something inside me ached hearing that because suddenly so much about Wyatt made sense. Why he took care of everyone automatically. Why he struggled asking for help. Why he looked surprised every time someone showed up for him emotionally. I reached for his hand immediately. "Wyatt." He shrugged lightly like it wasn't a big deal, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine anymore. "It's whatever." "No," I said softly. "It's not." For a second, he just looked exhausted. Then quietly, "I think part of me keeps waiting for this to disappear, too." That one hurt. I shifted closer instantly, sliding my hand against his jaw until he finally looked at me. "Hey." His eyes lifted slowly. I'm here. Wyatt swallowed hard. I know. No, I murmured, brushing my thumb lightly against his cheek. I mean it. I'm not halfway in this. The expression on his face after that nearly wrecked me because he looked like he wanted to believe me, like he already did a little, but wasn't fully used to the idea yet. Then Wyatt leaned forward and kissed me softly. Not rushed, not heated, just emotional. His hands slid against the back of my neck carefully, holding me close. And when he pulled back, his forehead stayed resting against mine. You really are dangerous, he whispered. I smiled slightly. Why? Because you make me want things. What kind of things? His eyes searched mine quietly. A future. God, that word settled deep inside my chest. A future. Not temporary. Not casual. Real. And suddenly, I wanted it too. Way more than I was prepared for. That night was the first time we slept in the same bed together. Actually slept. Which somehow felt more intimate than anything else. Wyatt kept acting like he was trying to give me space, even though his king-size bed was enormous. You can move closer, I mumbled eventually from my side of the mattress. In the dark beside me, Wyatt laughed quietly, was trying to be respectful. You're basically hanging off the bed. I'm a gentleman. You're ridiculous. A pause. Then slowly, carefully, Wyatt shifted closer. Warmth immediately spread along my side where his body brushed mine. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then Wyatt's arm slid carefully around my waist, like he was checking if it was okay. I turned toward him automatically, and in the faint light coming through the curtains, I could just barely make out his face. Soft, sleepy, looking at me like I was something precious. You good? He whispered. I nodded once, then quietly admitted, better than good. Wyatt smiled at that. Small and tired and real. And sometime during the night, I woke up briefly to find him half asleep with his face buried against my neck, arms wrapped tightly around me like instinct. Like even unconscious, he wanted me close. I didn't sleep much after that. Not because I was uncomfortable, because my chest physically hurt from how much I loved him. The next Sunday at the laundromat, things felt different again. Not because anything was wrong, because now everyone else noticed too. The old woman who always read magazines near the dryers smiled at us knowingly when Wyatt immediately stood to give me my seat. You boys are awfully cute, she said casually. I nearly inhaled dryer lint. Wyatt just grinned. Thanks, Linda. You finally asked him out, huh? I looked between them. You knew? Linda snorted loudly. Honey, this man looked like a kicked puppy every week before you walked in. Wyatt groaned instantly. Oh my God. I was laughing too hard to breathe properly, while Linda continued folding towels like she hadn't just destroyed him emotionally. You should have seen him fixing his hair in the dryer reflection. Linda. And the seat saving? She continued. Please, we all knew. I looked over at Wyatt, who now looked genuinely ready to die. You fixed your hair before I came in. He covered his face with one tattooed hand. Philip, you had a crush on me. I hate both of you. I was still laughing when Wyatt finally grabbed my wrist and pulled me closer between his knees, then quietly into my ear so only I could hear. You're lucky I'm in love with you. The words hit me instantly. Read. Every single time. I smiled helplessly and kissed him softly right there beside the dryers. And somewhere behind us, Linda yelled. About time. By December, Wyatt basically lived in my apartment half the week. Not officially, but his boots stayed by my front door now. His hoodie permanently occupied one corner of my couch, and somehow my fridge had transformed from expired yogurt graveyard into an actual adult refrigerator. Because Wyatt kept quietly restocking it, I told him one night, normal people don't sneak vegetables into their boyfriend's apartment. Wyatt looked up from the kitchen. You ate an entire bag of shredded cheese for dinner once. I was going through something. You were watching reality TV, emotionally. He laughed under his breath and tossed a grape at my forehead. I loved him so much it was becoming ridiculous. And apparently everyone else could tell too, especially Ava. One Sunday before Christmas, Wyatt brought her to the laundromat again because his sister was working a double shift. The second Ava saw me, she sprinted across the room dramatically. Uncle Philip! I barely caught her before she launched herself directly into my chest. Wyatt walked in behind her carrying laundry baskets and looking deeply tired already. She had 3 cookies in the car, he warned. That explains the tackle. Ava gasped. I did not tackle. You almost broke my ribs. She definitely did, Wyatt muttered. Then he lay down and kissed me quickly like it was the most natural thing in the world, which honestly it had become. Ava immediately narrowed her eyes suspiciously. You guys kiss a lot now, Wyatt sighed. Yeah. Why? Because I love him. Silence. My brain stopped. Completely stopped. Wyatt froze too, like he hadn't realized he said it out loud so casually. Meanwhile, Ava looked disgusted by the entire conversation. Ew. But I couldn't even laugh because Wyatt was staring at me now, and there was no taking it back. Not that he wanted to. Slowly, Wyatt's expression softened. Then quieter, just for me. I do. God. Even after hearing it before, it still hit me like a truck. I smiled helplessly. I know. Wyatt looked visibly emotional for a second after that. Then Ava ruined the moment immediately by yelling, "Can I have vending machine chips?" And just like that, the spell broke. Wyatt groaned dramatically while I laughed into his shoulder. A week later, something happened that scared the hell out of me. Wyatt got hurt at work. Not badly, but enough. I was at my desk finishing client revisions when he texted me, "Don't freak out," which is objectively the worst possible way to begin a sentence. By the time I got to the garage, my heart was pounding. I burst through the side entrance and immediately found Wyatt sitting on a workbench while one of his coworkers wrapped gauze around his forearm. Blood stained the towel in his lap. Oh my God. Wyatt looked up instantly. Hi. He blinked at me. Wyatt, it looks worse than it is. His coworker snorted loudly. That's because he's dramatic. I'm dramatic? I repeated incredulously. You're pale, Wyatt pointed out, because you're bleeding. The coworker finally finished wrapping his arm and walked away muttering something about lovesick idiots. I ignored him completely and stepped closer to Wyatt. Let me see. It's fine, Wyatt. He sighed and carefully uncovered part of the towel. The cut stretched along his forearm, angry and stitched. My stomach flipped immediately. What happened? Metal edge slipped while lifting an engine part. You needed stitches. Yeah. You texted me, "Don't freak out." I was trying to help. I stared at him another second before gently touching his wrist, and suddenly all my panic turned into something softer, because Wyatt looked exhausted again. Not physically, emotionally, like he hated worrying me. You scared me, I admitted quietly. His face changed immediately. I know. The sincerity in his voice took all the anger out of me instantly. Wyatt reached for my hand with his uninjured arm. Come here. I stepped closer automatically, standing between his knees while he held onto my hand carefully. I'm okay, he murmured. I nodded once, but apparently my face still betrayed me, because Wyatt touched my waist gently and looked up at me with that soft expression again. Hey, what? You care about me a lot, huh? I laughed weakly, unfortunately. That finally made him smile. Then Wyatt pulled me forward until my forehead rested against his. You know what's crazy? What? Nobody's ever panicked over me like this before. That broke my heart a little, because of course they hadn't. Of course Wyatt had spent most of his life being the dependable one instead of the cared-for one. I cupped his face gently. Well, get used to it. Wyatt looked at me for a long second. Then very quietly, you really stayed. The vulnerability in those words nearly destroyed me. I kissed him softly before answering. Yeah, idiot, I did. And Wyatt smiled against my mouth in that small, overwhelmed way he always did when he felt too much at once. A few nights later, Wyatt invited me to his family's Christmas dinner, which absolutely terrified him for reasons I didn't fully understand at first. You've met my sister already, he said while driving. Mom's easy. Ava worships you. Then why do you look like you're going to war? Wyatt tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel. My family's complicated. I frowned a little. How? He hesitated. Then, finally, my dad might be there. Oh. That explained everything. I reached over immediately, resting my hand against his leg. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. Wyatt covered my hand with his instantly. I want you there. That quiet certainty got me again. Always. So when we arrived at his mom's house 20 minutes later, I squeezed his hand once before he opened the truck door. And Wyatt squeezed back, hard, like courage. The house itself was warm and loud and smelled like cinnamon. Ava screamed when she saw me. His sister hugged me immediately. His mom cried after meeting me for approximately 30 seconds. Wyatt never brings anyone home, she whispered dramatically while pulling me into the kitchen. Mom, Wyatt warned from across the room. What? It's true. I looked over at him instinctively, and Wyatt was already looking at me. That same look, like he still couldn't fully believe I was there. But halfway through dinner, the front door opened and the entire room changed. Wyatt went still beside me instantly. I looked up. A man stood in the doorway. Older version of Wyatt. Same eyes, same jawline, except colder somehow. The silence around the table became immediate and heavy. Then, quietly, Wyatt muttered, "Of course he came." And I realized all at once, this night was about to become something much bigger than Christmas dinner. The man standing in the doorway looked exactly like an older, harder version of Wyatt. Same dark hair, same broad shoulders, same intense eyes. But where Wyatt felt warm once you knew him, this man felt sharp around the edges. The room had gone completely silent. Wyatt's hand tightened around his fork beside me. Across the table, his sister looked exhausted already. "Dad," she said flatly. The man gave a short nod, like he belonged there, despite the tension filling the entire house. "I was invited. No one said you couldn't come," Wyatt's mom replied carefully from the kitchen doorway, but nobody sounded happy about it. I glanced at Wyatt instinctively. He looked furious. Not loud furious, worse, controlled furious, the kind that sat heavy behind his eyes. His dad finally noticed me sitting beside him. "Who's this?" Before I could answer, Wyatt spoke immediately. "My boyfriend." No hesitation, no softening, just direct. I felt my chest tighten instantly. His father's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh." The silence after that stretched awkwardly. Then Ava suddenly shouted from the living room floor, "His name's Philip, and he's nice." Honestly, thank God for Ava, because the tension cracked just enough for people to breathe again. Wyatt's mom hurried everyone back toward dinner, while his father took a seat at the far end of the table, as far from Wyatt as possible, which, judging by Wyatt's expression, was intentional on both sides. I leaned slightly closer to him under the table. "You okay?" Wyatt nodded once, but I could feel how tense he was. His knee bounced slightly beneath the tablecloth. His jaw stayed locked tight. And suddenly I understood something important. Wyatt wasn't scared of his father. He was bracing himself against old hurt. Dinner became this strange balancing act after that, everyone trying to act normal while years of unresolved tension sat in the room with us. Wyatt barely spoke. His father barely looked at him. And every time they accidentally made eye contact, something painful passed silently between them. At one point, Wyatt's mom asked me about work, clearly trying to lighten the mood. I answered while Wyatt quietly reached for my hand beneath the table. The second our fingers intertwined, I felt him relax slightly. Just slightly, but enough. His thumb brushed slowly against my knuckles while conversations continued around us, like grounding himself. Then finally, after nearly an hour of awkward small talk, Wyatt's father spoke again. "So, how long have you two been together?" I glanced at Wyatt before answering. "About 4 months." His father nodded once. Then, after a pause, "You seem serious." Wyatt answered before I could. "We are." Again, that immediate certainty. No embarrassment, no hesitation. And weirdly, that seemed to affect his father more than anything else had all night. The older man studied Wyatt carefully across the table. "You happy?" The question sounded almost suspicious, like he genuinely didn't know how to ask it. Wyatt leaned back slightly in his chair, then calmly answered, "Yeah." Simple, honest, certain. I felt my throat tighten a little hearing it, because Wyatt wasn't performing. He meant it completely. For a second, his father just stared at him. Then slowly, his gaze shifted toward me. I honestly expected judgment, disapproval maybe. Instead, he looked tired, older than I realized at first glance. And quietly, almost awkwardly, he said, "Carter." The entire table seemed surprised by that response, including Wyatt. But before anyone could process it further, his father stood from the table. "I should go." His mom frowned immediately. "You just got here." "I know," but he was already grabbing his coat. Then, after a hesitation that visibly cost him something, he looked at Wyatt. "I'm glad you're doing okay." Wyatt went still beside me because suddenly this wasn't about dinner anymore. This was about years. Years of silence. Years of resentment. Years of absence. His father swallowed once, then quietly, "I know I don't really get to ask for much from you." Nobody moved. "But I'd like to try again someday, if you'll let me." The room felt completely silent. Wyatt stared at him for a long moment without speaking, and honestly, I had no idea what he'd say. This man had hurt him deeply. That much was obvious. But I could also see something else in Wyatt's expression now. Not forgiveness exactly, just exhaustion from carrying the anger alone for so long. Finally, Wyatt exhaled slowly through his nose, then said, "Maybe." One word, but it mattered. You could see it all over his father's face. He nodded once. "Okay." Then quietly to me before leaving, "Take care of him." And before I could even answer, Wyatt muttered dryly beside me, "He already does." That got the smallest laugh out of his father before the front door closed behind him. Silence lingered afterward. Then Ava looked up from her coloring book and announced, "Well, that was weird." The entire table burst out laughing, even Wyatt, and just like that, the tension finally broke. Later that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Wyatt and I stood alone outside on his mom's back porch. Snow fell softly across the yard. Cold air curled around us, while yellow Christmas lights glowed through the windows behind us. Wyatt leaned against the porch railing quietly. I stood beside him, close enough that our shoulders touched. "You okay?" I asked again softly. This time he took longer to answer. "I don't know." "Fair." We stayed quiet another minute. Then Wyatt suddenly laughed under his breath. "What?" He shook his head slightly. "If you told me 6 months ago that some guy from the laundromat would end up standing with me through family trauma." I smiled. Very romantic. "You know what I mean." "Yeah, I did." Because the truth was, neither of us expected this. Not really. One random seat at a laundromat somehow became this entire life together. And standing there beside him now, I realized something almost overwhelming. I couldn't imagine losing it anymore. Wyatt looked over at me then, snowflakes caught briefly in his dark hair. "You stayed calm in there," he murmured. "I was terrified." "You hid it well," I smiled slightly. "I just kept focusing on you." That soft look appeared in his eyes again immediately, the one that always got me. "You always do that," he said quietly. "What?" "Show up for me." I stepped closer without thinking. "So do you." Wyatt's hand slid gently against my waist beneath my coat. Then, after a pause, he admitted softly, "I almost didn't come tonight." I frowned slightly. "Why?" His eyes searched mine. "Because every important thing in my life before this eventually hurt." God, there it was again, that honesty, raw and careful and real. I touched his face gently. "But you came anyway." "Yeah, why?" And Wyatt smiled, small, certain. "Because you were with me." That did it. That completely did it. I kissed him immediately, cold hands against his jaw while snow fell around us. And Wyatt kissed me back like he always did now, like he knew exactly how much I mattered to him. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "You know something?" he murmured. "What?" "I still would have saved you that seat every week even if nothing happened between us." I laughed softly. "That's actually insane." "Probably," then quieter, "but I'm really glad something happened." "Me too." God, me too. Because somehow the tattooed guy at the laundromat became the love of my life. Not through dramatic moments, not through perfect timing, just consistency, kindness, showing up every Sunday, saving me a seat before I even realized I needed one. And honestly, I think I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful I walked into that laundromat on a rainy Sunday night, because Wyatt was there waiting for me, like he always is.